Let's be honest, we all have that one favourite Jedi. But who do you think really deserves to be called the best? In this video, we're taking a look at the Jedi and their history by ranking them based on skills, power, legacy, and overall impact in the Star Wars universe. So sit back, grab a warm drink and settle in. I promise you, this is going to be a great experience. And if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing where fellow Star Wars fans are watching from across the galaxy. Alright, if we're talking about the number one Jedi, I think the safest bet, and probably the best one, is Yoda. This little green guy outlived entire Jedi generations. Like, imagine if your high school teacher taught you in your whole family tree. That's the scale we're working with. And somehow, during all that time, he didn't burn out and didn't lose his mind. That alone should earn him some kind of galactic patience award. And yeah, let's talk about that teaching part, because this guy taught everyone. If you were a Jedi in the Republic era, odds are high that little green grandpa taught you how to not accidentally slice your own leg off with a lightsaber. Mace Windu learned under Yoda, Dooku, Yoda's student, even Luke technically. Though yeah, that one was a little last minute and involved a swamp, some very intense therapy, and a lot of grunting. Now, Jedi teaching isn't like read chapter 3 and do your lightsaber homework. It's philosophy, control, and discipline. Yoda had to walk this weird line of raising kids to be peacekeepers in a galaxy that kept dragging them into wars. And somehow, he kept that balance for centuries. He didn't just pass down the rules, he was the rules. He was like the soul of the Jedi Order. And that's before we even get into the combat side. People always forget Yoda was actually a beast in a fight. It's like seeing your grandma stand up from the couch and suddenly she's backflipping through the kitchen, deflecting Nerf darts with a wooden spoon. Like, yeah, he walks with a cane and talks like he's been awake for 400 years, but just give him a lightsaber. Yoda didn't define his greatness just through power. That's kind of what makes him special. He could wreck people. He could force smash tanks and duel Sith to the death, but he chose not to. His whole thing was restraint, patience, perspective. He knew that being a Jedi wasn't about being strong, it was about being right. Even when right meant doing things the hard way, or admitting when you'd failed. And yes, he did fail. A few times. Big ones. We'll get to that. But when you've been around for almost a millennium, mistakes are part of the deal. What really mattered is that he owned those mistakes. Yoda didn't just sit on a council and hand out judgment. He constantly questioned the Jedi path, especially when the galaxy started falling apart. And even though it did fall apart, he didn't blame everyone else or rage against the Sith. He went into exile, not out of shame, but because he needed to think, to reflect, to figure out what had gone wrong. That's a level of humility that most Jedi couldn't even pretend to have. Like, look at Mace Windu. Brilliant, powerful, respected, but the man had the emotional flexibility of a brick. Yoda, on the other hand, spent 800 years teaching the Jedi one way. And in the end, he realized maybe they needed to change. That takes some guts, and you really feel that shift when he meets Luke. He's not the same Yoda from the prequels. He's weirder, more playful, a little less stiff, a little more crack an egg on your head and tell you to unlearn everything. But even then he still teaches, still guides, still believes. Because that's what makes Yoda great. He never stops trying to pass on wisdom. Even when he's old, even when he's tired, even when everything's gone horribly wrong. The Jedi are almost extinct, the galaxy is a wreck, and Yoda's sitting in a swamp going, "Alright kid, let's give this one more shot." And somehow that last shot actually works. But that's just the beginning. Yoda's legacy didn't end in that swamp. It kept rippling outward long after he became a Force ghost. And yeah, we're going to talk about that too, because you can't be the greatest Jedi without your shadow stretching far beyond your lifetime. So here's the thing that hits you. Once you really start thinking about Yoda, the guy didn't just live through Jedi history, he was Jedi history. Like, you know how when someone super old starts a sentence with, "back in my day," and it makes you want to leave the room? Well, when Yoda said that, his day was literally before most major planets even had indoor plumbing. That's how long this guy was around. But the crazy part isn't just how long he lived, it's how consistent he was through all of it. Imagine trying to hold on to your values for 900 years, while everything around you changes. Political systems come and go, alliances shift, fashion gets weird, and yet Yoda's sitting there on the council with the same calm face like, "I've seen this before." And the wild part? Most of the time, he was right. You didn't agree with Yoda? Chances are you were the one missing something. But even someone like Yoda couldn't see everything coming. Because for all the wisdom and force power in the world, he still got caught up in the Jedi Order's biggest mistake. They got way too comfortable being part of the Republic. And then they became soldiers, commanders, tools in a war that wasn't really theirs to begin with. And Yoda went along with it. That's not to say he liked it. You can tell he hated the idea of turning kids with glow sticks into military leaders. He adapted. Maybe he thought it was temporary. Maybe he thought they could guide the Republic back to peace from the inside. But either way, he was part of that shift, and he carried that weight. And the thing is, he felt it. There's this moment during the Clone Wars where he basically admits, quietly, in that classic Yoda way, that the Jedi have lost their way. A small, tired realization that they're not what they used to be. And that hits harder than any lightsaber duel. Now, a younger Jedi might have freaked out, or quit, or tried to fix it by blowing something up. But Yoda, he stayed in it, kept teaching, kept leading. Even knowing that the Order was heading toward a cliff, he tried to slow it down, tried to adjust course, even if just a little. But then came Sidious, and let's be honest, Yoda was one of the few who could even kind of match him. Yoda knew something was off the whole time. He just couldn't pin it down. Because Sidious was playing a longer game, and yeah, it's a little ironic that the most dangerous Sith in history actually beat the Jedi by being the most Yoda-like guy in the room. Subtle, quiet, patient, but deadly underneath. When Yoda finally faced Palpatine, it was the symbol of everything collapsing. The Jedi lost. The Republic turned. The clone army, which Yoda had led, flipped on him and his people overnight. And he knew, that moment when he loses to Sidious, it was the realization that everything he'd built had failed. That's brutal. Like existentially brutal. Yoda took the hit, stepped back and started doing the one thing the Jedi should have been doing all along. Listening, watching, reflecting, not trying to fix the galaxy, just trying to understand it better. And that swamp on Dagobah, it was where Yoda finally unlearned centuries of Jedi doctrine. Where he evolved, he realized that maybe the Jedi had gotten too rigid, too obsessed with rules, too disconnected from the living force. And that whole living force thing, it's not just a cool buzzword, it's what the Jedi forgot to connect with. While they were sitting in tall buildings debating ethics, the dark side was moving under their feet. Yoda finally saw that. It took a galactic collapse and a personal loss. But he saw it, and when Luke finally came to train with him, Yoda didn't go back to lightsaber Form 4 and meditation things. He basically turned Jedi training into emotional boot camp. He challenged everything Luke thought he knew, taught him that the Force wasn't about power, but about connection. That fear wasn't something to avoid. It was something to understand. That's why Yoda feels so different in the original trilogy. He's not just older, he's wiser. Like, real wisdom. The kind that only comes from failure. He's still funny, still weird, still likes to mess with people a little. But now it's layered with a kind of gentle sadness. He knows the cost of mistakes, and he's trying to pass on just enough to make sure Luke doesn't repeat them. We've talked about Yoda the teacher, the philosopher, the survivor of the biggest Jedi disaster in galactic history. But before we move on from this little green legend, there's still one piece of the puzzle we haven't fully talked about, and it's a big one. His actual power. Because let's be honest, when someone lives 900 years, trains half the galaxy, and can backflip off walls while clashing sabers with Sith Lords, you start to wonder, was Yoda just wise and experienced? Or was he genuinely one of the most powerful Jedi ever? Short answer, yes. Very much yes. Long answer, let's dig in. So first off, Yoda was absurdly strong in the Force. That's kind of a given. But it wasn't just raw power. A lot of Jedi had talent. Anakin, for example, was basically a walking Force battery with a lightsaber problem. Mace Windu had insane combat precision. Even guys like Ki-Adi-Mundi and Plo Koon were no pushovers. But Yoda had something they didn't: balance. His strength in the Force was crazy high, but more importantly, it was stable. He didn't wobble, didn't crack, didn't lose control even under pressure. That's what made him terrifying in a fight. Let's look at the Count Dooku duel in Episode 2 for a second. Dooku was no joke. He was elegant, fast, and extremely refined. He fought Obi-Wan and Anakin at the same time, and basically handled them without breaking a sweat. Then Yoda walks in, and suddenly Dooku's entire vibe shifts from "I'm in charge" to "let me distract you and run away." That says a lot. And then you've got the duel with Sidious. We're talking peak Darth Sidious here, the guy who orchestrated the fall of the Jedi, ran the galaxy, and could shoot lightning like he was born in a thunderstorm. They were throwing Senate pods like frisbees, and that wasn't just force strength, it was raw mastery. Timing, precision, and control. That entire fight is like watching two grandmasters play chess with lightsabers and telekinesis. Could Yoda have won? Maybe. Honestly, he was holding his own. But the point isn't whether he beat Palpatine, it's that he was the only Jedi alive who even could. Think about that. Mace Windu fought Sidious with backup and still ended up yeeted out of a window. Anakin fell apart just watching that fight. But Yoda went in alone, looked the Dark Lord of the Sith in the face, and didn't blink. Now compare that to some of the other top-tier Jedi. Mace Windu had Varpad, that ultra-aggressive lightsaber style that basically flirted with the dark side. It gave him insane speed and intensity. And yeah, he beat Sidious in combat, but only for a minute, and arguably because Sidious wanted to draw Anakin in. Plus, Mace's approach was dangerous. It worked, but it relied on channeling and redirecting darkness. Yoda never had to do that. He stayed fully light side the entire time, and still fought on that level. Anakin Skywalker, before he went all murder everyone mode, was raw talent incarnate. In terms of potential, he could have become the most powerful Jedi ever, but he never had the discipline. Yoda was what Anakin might have been, if Anakin had patience and a sense of emotional control, which he didn't. Obi-Wan, extremely skilled, unshakable defense, incredible composure under pressure. But in a power matchup, Obi-Wan wasn't near Yoda's level. He was more like the guy who survives by being clever and precise. Yoda survives by casually lifting starfighters with his mind like it's yoga class. And let's not forget the less famous names, like Qui-Gon Jinn, who had a unique view of the Force and pioneered the whole becoming one with the Force trick. That's cool, very spiritual. But Qui-Gon was more of a rogue sage than a powerhouse. Yoda was both. He understood the spiritual stuff and could still absolutely ruin your day in a lightsaber duel. Even Luke, after all his training and heroics, never really surpassed Yoda. He got close, maybe spiritually, maybe emotionally, but in terms of sheer power and control, Yoda still had him beat. Even Luke knew that. He never tried to top Yoda, he just carried the torch differently. He had the skills, he had the Force abilities, he had the dueling chops. But what made him great was that he didn't need to show off any of it. Yoda never walked into a room to dominate. He walked in to listen, to understand and to guide. And that's what put him over the top. He wasn't perfect, he misjudged the rise of the Sith. He didn't stop the fall of the Jedi. But even through all that, he never let his failures define him. He adapted, he learned, he stayed focused. And in the end, when he was old, fading, and full of regrets, he still had the clarity to look at Luke and say, "Pass on what you have learned." That one line, that's the whole Jedi philosophy. Yoda didn't want followers. He wanted students who'd do better than him, who'd grow beyond him. That's real leadership, real legacy. And just when you think he's gone forever, he shows up as a Force ghost in The Last Jedi, drops some fire wisdom, and lightning bolts a tree just to remind you he can still throw hands if needed. Honestly, no one else pulls that off. Force ghost mischief, classic Yoda move. Yoda wasn't just the oldest Jedi, or the strongest, or the wisest. He was the one who held it all together the longest, the one who trained the best, the one who stayed true when everything else fell apart, and the one who, even in the end, still had enough spark left to teach one final lesson. Alright, so putting Luke Skywalker at top 2 feels obvious to a lot of people, but at the same time, you kind of have to sit back and think about how weird that is. Like, this guy starts as a moisture farmer on Tatooine, in the middle of nowhere. He's not born in a Jedi temple. He doesn't grow up swinging lightsabers or studying the Force. He's just some kid whining about power converters and helping his uncle fix space tractors. And that kid becomes the guy who redeems Darth Vader and rebuilds the Jedi? That's insane. But that's also exactly why Luke deserves this spot. Because he didn't start out as anyone special. There was no prophecy, no chosen one energy or council saying, "This one's the future." He basically stumbled into the story, almost by accident, and instead of running away or messing it up completely, he slowly, awkwardly figured it out. And that journey, That's what makes him legendary. You remember how clueless he was in A New Hope. Obi-Wan gives him a lightsaber and he's like, "Cool, how do I not slice my own arm off?" Then he hops on the Falcon, almost gets shot in training mode, and thinks the Force is something you just kind of squint hard enough to use. And yet, it works. Slowly, yeah, but you can feel it. He's not faking it. He's genuinely trying to figure it out. And he asks questions. Dumb ones, smart ones, nervous ones. It's very human. But what really makes Luke stand out early on isn't that he's powerful. It's that he cares. He has this sense of right and wrong that's just honest. Like when he sees Leia's message, or finds out about Alderaan, or learns about his father. Every time, he doesn't get cold or cynical. He feels it. He's reactive, emotional, and he actually gives a damn about what's happening, which is a huge contrast to a lot of the Jedi we saw before him. And yeah, okay, he's impulsive, like very impulsive. You give this guy a half-baked plan and a lightsaber, and he's ready to run into a space station full of stormtroopers. But that's also what pushes him forward. He doesn't sit around waiting to be ready. He moves, tries and fails, tries again. He's like a force-powered golden retriever with anxiety, full of heart, not much strategy, but so much effort. Then Empire Strikes Back hits, and this is where Luke really starts becoming a Jedi, kind of by getting his ego wrecked. He goes to Dagobah, and right away you see how much he still doesn't get it. Yoda is out here talking about patience and the deeper connection to the Force. And Luke's just like, "Cool, can I levitate my X-Wing yet?" But Luke struggles with that, like a lot of people would. He wants to do, not just feel, and then he leaves training early. Because of course he does. Because he's Luke. And what happens? He gets absolutely smoked by Vader. Vader is tossing crates at him like it's a Jedi gym class, and Luke's the new kid who showed up in sandals. That moment, the whole "I am your father" thing, is less about the twist and more about the emotional gut punch. Luke realizes he wasn't just unprepared to face Vader. He didn't even understand who Vader was. He ran into that duel thinking he could end it. But here's where Luke separates himself from most other Jedi. He learns. He doesn't run away from that pain. Between Empire and Return of the Jedi, there's this quiet, off-screen transformation. He comes back wearing black, more calm, more focused. Still not perfect, but different, more balanced. By the time he walks into Jabba's palace, you feel the shift. He's not swaggering in like a hero. He's testing himself. Still a little unsure, still not fully Jedi level, but getting there. And when he tells Jabba he's giving him one chance, that's not arrogance, that's conviction. And the best part is, Luke never gets drunk on his power. Not even when he could have. When you think about how fast he went from "what's a force" to deflecting blaster bolts without even blinking, it's kind of wild. But he never leans into that power trip. Even when he's confident, he still checks himself. He never falls into the "I'm the chosen one, everyone listen to me" trap. He doesn't want to be above anyone, he just wants to help. And that mindset becomes everything when he finally faces Vader again. Because Luke doesn't win that fight by being stronger. He doesn't win by being faster or smarter or having better form. He wins by choosing not to fight anymore. That's what flips the script. That's what finally breaks through to Anakin. And that choice, to throw away his lightsaber and say, "I am a Jedi, like my father before me," is probably the most Jedi moment in the whole saga. His whole life was a chain of risks, mistakes and lessons. And somehow, through all of it, he didn't lose his heart. He didn't lose himself. But we're just scratching the surface. That moment on the second Death Star, that was Luke at his peak. But what came after? That's where things get even more interesting. Because rebuilding the Jedi Order from nothing, that's not a victory story, that's a whole new level of struggle. So, the Empire falls, Vader's gone. Sidious gets yeeted into a reactor shaft. Luke drags his dad's crispy body out like some kind of weird Jedi funeral hike. And for the first time since the Clone Wars, the galaxy isn't run by a cackling maniac. It's over, right? He did it. The Jedi are back. Roll credits. Except, not really. Because here's the thing nobody really prepares you for. What happens after the war is won? What happens when you're standing there with no Jedi Order, no Masters, or a blueprint? Just you and a bunch of half-remembered swamp lessons from a green goblin in a backpack. That's where Luke is now. He's not the student anymore. He's the only one left. And that weight, that's crushing. Like, imagine being handed the entire legacy of a 25,000-year-old religion and told, cool, rebuild it from scratch, good luck. That's the situation. And Luke doesn't run from it. He tries. He starts digging through old Jedi texts, hunting down survivors, trying to figure out what the Jedi were really supposed to be. And here's where Luke really starts to separate himself from everyone else, even Yoda, because he doesn't just try to copy the past. He doesn't say, let's go back to the robes and rules and temples. He starts questioning what worked, what didn't. Why did the Jedi fall? Should they even come back the same way? This wasn't a guy obsessed with tradition. He was trying to build something better, a Jedi Order that could evolve, that didn't force people into emotional lockdown, that didn't pretend fear and love didn't exist. Luke was figuring it out in real time, which, yeah, meant he made a lot of mistakes, but it also meant he was doing something the old order never did. He was learning, and he didn't just sit on a rock somewhere theorizing about it. He acted. He found Force-sensitive students. He taught them and trained them. He tried to pass on what he'd learned, not just from Obi-Wan and Yoda, but from his own experiences, from Vader. That's what's wild about Luke's Jedi philosophy. It was built on forgiveness, on redemption, on second chances. And that's something we hadn't really seen before in the Jedi. Yoda's generation was all about rules and detachment. Mace Windu literally gave Anakin the, if what you told me is true, you will have gained my trust speech, like he was writing an HR warning. But Luke looked evil in the face and said, I still believe there's good in you. And it worked. That's the foundation he was building on. But rebuilding something like the Jedi Order, that's not a one-man job. And Luke, for all his growth, was still, well, human. Which means he had doubts, he made assumptions. And yeah, eventually he made some very big mistakes. Enter Ben Solo. So Luke sees the darkness in Ben, his own nephew, and he panics. For one split second he thinks, what if this becomes another Vader? And in that moment he considers ending it before it begins. He ignites his lightsaber, just for a second, just a flash of fear, and that's it. That one moment breaks everything. Ben freaks out, destroys the temple, and becomes Kylo Ren. His dream, his effort, everything he was building is gone. Just like that. And Luke, he disappears. A lot of people really didn't like this version of Luke when they saw it in The Last Jedi. They were like, why would Luke give up? That's not what heroes do. But honestly, it is. Because Luke didn't run away because he was scared of a fight. He ran away because he felt like he failed as a teacher. And for someone whose whole mission was to redeem, to heal, that kind of failure hits different. He felt like he'd corrupted the entire idea of what the Jedi were supposed to be. And it broke him. But here's the important part, and the reason this doesn't knock him off the top of the Jedi list. Luke learns from this too. That girl from the prequel shows up. A lot of you don't like to speak about that, but still, he starts to see that maybe the failure wasn't in teaching. It was in expecting perfection, in thinking that one mistake erased everything good he'd done. And that realization, that's the final piece of his journey. Because when Luke comes back at the end of The Last Jedi, he shows up as a symbol. He stands in front of the entire First Order, alone, and gives the galaxy a story again, a new myth, a reminder that hope still exists, even when everything feels lost. And the way he does it, with a force projection so powerful, it literally spans light years. He tricks Kylo, buys time for the Resistance, becomes the legend without throwing a single punch. And then, he fades like someone who finally found peace with everything. That's Luke. He never stopped trying to understand what it meant to be a Jedi. Because he wasn't afraid to question, to fall, to get back up and say, okay, that didn't work. What now? And we're not done yet. Okay, so here's something that happens a lot when people talk about Luke. They either overhype him like he's a Jedi superhero who could beat everyone in 2 seconds, or they underrate him, like, he just got lucky because Vader felt bad. And the truth? It's somewhere in the middle. Because Luke wasn't the most powerful Jedi in terms of raw potential. That title probably still belongs to Anakin, and he wasn't the best technical duelist either. Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, even some old-school Jedi like Plo Koon probably had tighter form, but Luke had something way more important than just Force stats and lightsaber rankings. He had control, and he had growth. That combo? That's what made him a beast. Let's rewind a bit. In the original trilogy, Luke's power progression is super fast, like suspiciously fast. He goes from, what's a force, to, I'm fighting Darth Vader with one hand in, what, 3 movies? That's insane. Even Anakin, with all his midichlorian hype and Jedi training from age 9, took years to reach that level. Luke did it in a few action-packed summers. But the cool part? Luke never gets cocky about it. He never walks into a room trying to dominate. When he force chokes those guards at Jabba's palace, he does it calmly. When he deflects blaster bolts in Return of the Jedi, it's just second nature. And when he fights Vader again, he's holding back the entire time until Vader threatens Leia. Then you finally see Luke let loose, and it's kind of terrifying. Like, he goes from defense to absolute rage mode in 2 seconds. That final flurry, it's like, oh right, this guy could have broken Vader if he wanted to. But he didn't. He pulled himself back. That moment when he tosses the lightsaber, that's not weakness, that's strength. Choosing not to use power you clearly have, that's Jedi level 100 behavior right there. But okay, let's get into the Force stuff. What could Luke actually do? By the time we hit the post-return of the Jedi era, especially in the books and extended lore, Luke is casually doing stuff that would have made prequel-era Jedi drop their cafeteria trays. We're talking pulling entire starships out of the sky. Okay, fine, maybe not every time. But the dude could move massive objects like it was a morning workout. Force projection across light years. Yeah, that final moment in The Last Jedi, that wasn't some trick. That was the most powerful Force feat ever shown in a film. He created a perfect visual and audio illusion, sustained it for minutes, while fighting, while interacting with people, and while sitting on a rock dying. Sensing entire galactic events, Luke could feel the deaths of planets. Jedi like Ki-Adi-Mundi could sense pain in a region. Luke was out here casually picking up emotional shifts across entire systems. Force speed, reflexes, and insight. He could absolutely hang in a high-speed duel. And mentally, he was ridiculously sharp. He could sense intentions, read conflict, and detect darkness in people, like he had some kind of built-in Jedi mood ring. Even with all that, he never leaned into it too far. He didn't become a Force god. He didn't try to control people. He didn't use power to prop himself up. If anything, he pulled back when it became too much. Now, let's compare this to some of the other greats. Yoda, probably still the best in terms of balance, clarity, and decades of experience. But even Yoda never projected himself across the galaxy. He could have, but we never saw it. Anakin, definitely stronger on the raw power side, especially pre-suit, but he never had Luke's emotional discipline. Anakin's ceiling was high, but he never hit it because he kept self-sabotaging. Luke reached his potential, slowly and carefully, and never let fear run the show. Rey was strong. Look, I don't know if I'm even allowed to speak about her. Mace Windu, more refined in combat, better duelist, but emotionally, much stiffer, more rule-bound. Luke had way more emotional intelligence. That matters. Obi-Wan, possibly the most humble Jedi and probably the best defensive fighter, but in terms of raw Force feats, Luke passed him by Return of the Jedi, and he had more impact on the galaxy long-term. But again, Luke never wanted to be the best. He didn't care about titles or rankings. That's what made him different. And honestly, that's what made him great. Because he redefined what a Jedi could be. He wasn't bound by the dogma of the old order. He wasn't corrupted by the obsession with power like the Sith. He made peace with the middle, the grey area, the hard choices, the failure. That's why he's the second here. Because Luke didn't just fight evil, he understood it, and then chose not to become it. He took everything that came before, the Jedi's pride, their downfall, the Sith's temptations, the war, the losses, the ghosts, and said, okay, what can we do differently this time? And that's something even Yoda struggled with. Luke was the first Jedi to fully step outside of the cycle, to break it. And that's what made him the new hope. Okay, so putting Anakin Skywalker at third place isn't exactly the safest move, but let's be honest. This dude basically broke and rebuilt the galaxy with his bare hands. If this list was just about raw power, he might have taken the top 1 spot. If it was about best lightsaber skills, maybe still top 2. But Jedi rankings are complicated, because Anakin wasn't just a Jedi. He was a walking prophecy wrapped in anxiety. He was the most powerful, Force-sensitive being the Jedi Order ever found, period. Let's break that down. From the moment Qui-Gon met him, the red flags were actually glowing in a good way. The kid could see things before they happened. He had reflexes faster than any human, and Qui-Gon did the scan and said it straight up. His midi-chlorian count is off the charts, over 20,000. That's more than Yoda, more than anyone. The guy was engineered by the Force. There's a whole mystery about whether he was literally created by it, or manipulated into existence by a Sith ritual, or both. But either way, the end result was the same. He was meant to shake the galaxy. Let's talk about his abilities. Lightsaber combat, he was a freak. Obi-Wan trained him in Form 4 and Form 5, and Anakin just absorbed everything like a sponge. He was just brutally efficient. Aggressive, but technical. Strong, but not reckless. In the Clone Wars, he routinely took on multiple opponents, sometimes Darksiders, and just steamrolled them. And the guy never lost a duel while he was still Anakin, ever. The only person who beat him was Obi-Wan. And even that was more about Anakin's emotions than his skill. If they ran that fight again with both of them emotionally stable, Anakin wins, no question. Force strength, unreal. He could move starships, pull massive objects mid-flight, use force speed and reflexes in combat without even thinking about it. And his force barrier, that invisible defense field around Force users, was nearly impenetrable. Blasters? Forget it. He just walked through fire like it was Tuesday. Even Jedi Masters noticed it. Mace Windu, who was never generous with praise, flat out admitted that Anakin was probably the most powerful Jedi alive. Even Yoda felt the power and was constantly wary of it. Not because Anakin was doing anything wrong, but because it was so much and came with so little emotional control. That's where the fear came in. The Jedi Council wasn't scared that Anakin would fail. They were scared that if he snapped, they wouldn't be able to stop him, which, well, turned out to be a valid concern. Let's not forget the fact that when he finally did go full Vader mode in Revenge of the Sith, he solo stormed the Jedi Temple, took out Jedi Knights, Masters, everyone. You can say what you want about morality. That's not what this part is about. From a pure power standpoint, Anakin was an extinction-level event. And here's the sad part. That wasn't even him at full strength. Anakin never reached his full potential. That's what makes him so scary. Everything he did as an incomplete Jedi. He was impulsive, emotional, still learning. And still he outpaced Jedi who'd been training for 40 plus years. And when he lost to Obi-Wan, that was a weakness in judgment. He let anger take the wheel, and it cost him everything. Now, the suit, post-Mustafar, obviously limited him. Vader was still powerful, but it was a different kind of power. Slower, more focused, more brutal. But he was never again as fast or fluid as he was before Mustafar. The real peak Anakin, the one that could have rivaled Yoda and surpassed him, died in the fire. But even after that, he was still scary. Vader, as a half-machine, still force-choked people across star systems. He could rip ships apart with the Force, and his instincts, still sharp, still precise, turned his broken body into a weapon. But the Jedi version of Anakin, the one before the fall, was something else entirely. If he had stayed in the light, stayed with the Jedi, mastered his emotions, and reached full maturity, we wouldn't be talking about who the greatest Jedi was. The Order was right to be scared, but maybe if they'd shown less fear and more understanding, it would have ended differently. Let's go back to the beginning. Anakin didn't grow up in a temple or in some noble family on Coruscant. He was born on Tatooine, a slave, just a kid with a knack for building things and fixing broken junk. The guy literally made his own pod racer out of scraps when he was 9. And that's the first big clue. He wasn't just Force sensitive, he was off the charts. Qui-Gon Jinn sees something in Anakin that nobody else does. And let's be real, Qui-Gon's not usually wrong about that kind of stuff. He wasn't some daydreaming old man. He just understood that the Jedi had gotten a little too stiff, a little too rules-obsessed, and he believed Anakin could shake things up in the right way. But from the second Anakin walks into the Jedi Temple, it's awkward. He's too old for starters. The other kids are meditating and playing with training remotes, and Anakin's still figuring out how to exist outside of slavery. His whole emotional foundation is just different, and the Council feels it, especially Yoda. Fear in this one, I sense. And yeah, no kidding. He's a kid who just left his mum behind on a desert planet where she's still a slave. What did they expect? But they take him in, reluctantly. And from that point on, the pressure's insane. He's not just a Jedi student, he's the chosen one. Supposed to bring balance to the Force. Supposed to fulfill a prophecy no one really understands, and that pressure messes with him. Anakin trains under Obi-Wan, and you'd think that would help. But honestly, That pairing was kind of cursed from the beginning. They respected each other, but there was always this weird big brother, little brother dynamic. Obi-Wan never really wanted to be a teacher. He was barely a Jedi Knight himself when he got the assignment. He did his best, and he really tried, but Anakin needed more than discipline and lightsaber drills. He needed emotional guidance. What he got was, try not to feel anything too much, which of course didn't work. Anakin felt everything, all the time. He was loyal, passionate, angry, protective, loving, all the things Jedi were trained to suppress. But it's not like he chose to be that way. That was just who he was, and sometimes it worked in his favor. He saved people, took bold action, won impossible fights because he refused to quit. But other times, it blew up in his face. Let's talk about the Clone Wars for a second. Anakin thrived in that chaos, like really thrived. The dude was made for war. He led from the front, inspired loyalty, and made decisions that no one else had the guts to make. His troops adored him. And yeah, sometimes he ignored orders, bent rules, or went a little too far. But he got results. And you know what? The Jedi let him. They didn't like it, but they needed it. They needed someone who could take the fight to the Separatists and win. So they looked the other way, let him rack up battlefield glory and medals, even though everyone knew something was off. He was getting stronger, but he wasn't getting more balanced. And that was a problem. The war didn't make him evil, but it normalized things that shouldn't have been normal. Death, anger, betrayal, secrets. All that stuff became part of the job, and Anakin was right in the middle of it. And while all that was going on, he was hiding his marriage to Padme, which again, it was just human. But Jedi weren't allowed to do that. So instead of dealing with it openly, he buried it, let it fester. And the more he buried, the more afraid he became of losing her. And that fear? That's what Palpatine wanted all along. Because Palpatine, being the creepy space politician he was, had been grooming Anakin since day one, whispering in his ear, stroking his ego, feeding into that feeling that the Jedi didn't really trust him. And when the dreams started, the visions of Padme dying in childbirth, that's when the cracks really started forming. Anakin was desperate, and Palpatine offered exactly what he needed, a solution. A way to stop death, a way to control the future, a way to finally have power over the things he feared most. Here's the part that people sometimes oversimplify. Anakin didn't fall to the dark side because he wanted power for power's sake. He fell because he was terrified. The Jedi told him to control his emotions, but they never taught him how to live with them. So when the one person he loved more than anything was suddenly part of these terrifying death visions, his whole emotional system just broke. And then, of course, Palpatine shows up like the worst friend ever, being all, "Hey, did you know the dark side might be able to stop death?" And the Jedi don't exactly make it easier. The Council doesn't trust him, Obi-Wan's caught in the middle, and Mace Windu basically tells him to sit down and stay out of the grown-up conversation. So now Anakin's stuck. If he sides with the Jedi, he loses Padme. If he sides with Palpatine, he betrays everything he's ever known. And what does he do? He picks Padme, sort of. That's what's wild about it. He doesn't even like Palpatine. He just believes this is his only shot at saving her. That's what tips him. He strikes down Windu in that moment of panic, and that's it. That's what makes Order 66 and the Temple Massacre so hard to watch. He's not doing it because he enjoys it. He's doing it because he thinks it's necessary. He thinks he's finally in control, finally protecting Padme, but he's not. He's just spiraling, convincing himself that every terrible thing he's doing is somehow justified. And then Padme shows up, and he realizes she doesn't understand. And when she tries to reach him, when Obi-Wan appears behind her, it's like a switch flips. Anakin finally sees what he's become, and instead of stopping, he doubles down, because the idea that he might be wrong is too much to handle. So he lashes out, chokes Padme, tries to kill Obi-Wan, and that fight on Mustafar? Man, that's not a duel. That's a meltdown with lightsabers. Anakin, he's faster, more aggressive, more unhinged, but Obi-Wan still beats him. Not because Obi-Wan's stronger, but because Anakin just isn't thinking straight. He's not fighting like a Jedi anymore. He's just angry, furious that the world didn't bend to his will. And then it ends. That moment, that awful, painful, pathetic moment, where Anakin's crawling up the ash, screaming about how he hates Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan, who loves him like a brother, just walks away. That's the end of the Jedi Anakin Skywalker, but not the end of the man. There's this line in Obi-Wan Kenobi where Anakin tells his old master, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did." And it's not even a boast, it's just cold, like he's not proud of what he became. He's just resigned to it. And even though he becomes Palpatine's ultimate enforcer, you can tell there's still something alive in there. Like, he hesitates with Ahsoka. He gets shaken when Luke shows up. He's brutal, but not robotic. There's conflict buried under the mask, literally and metaphorically. And that conflict is what keeps him alive. And the prophecy, the one about bringing balance to the Force, at this point in the story, it looks like a complete failure. So why is Anakin number 3? Because despite never reaching his full potential, despite falling, losing his limbs, spending 20 years in a metal shell doing Palpatine's dirty work, he still brought balance to the Force. He still made the hardest choice in the end, and saved the galaxy by destroying the Sith and saving his son, all while being one of the most naturally powerful beings the Jedi Order had ever seen. You know how in every friend group there's that one guy who's not the loudest, not trying to steal the spotlight, but somehow, when everything goes sideways, he's the one keeping it all together? Well, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He didn't have Yoda's mystique, or Anakin's Force hype, or Luke's destiny. He wasn't some prophecy kid. Nobody wrote songs about him. He just quietly did the job for decades. And if you actually look at his life, it's basically a checklist of every single impossible Jedi situation. And somehow, he didn't fall apart. That calm, patient, robe-folding, tea-drinking version of Obi-Wan we all picture. That wasn't how he started. The guy had a little fire in him. When he was a Padawan, the Council didn't even want him to be trained. They thought he was too stubborn, too emotional, which is hilarious, considering how measured he turned out later. It's like finding out your quiet friend used to throw desks in kindergarten. Qui-Gon was the only one who saw something in him. Obi-Wan wanted to do things by the book, while Qui-Gon was the guy who never read the book. And that made for the weirdest and most perfect dynamic. Obi-Wan learned discipline, sure, but more than that, he learned that following the Jedi Code wasn't the same as understanding the code. That's something that stuck with him for life. And when Qui-Gon died on Naboo, it kind of broke something in Obi-Wan. He didn't show it much, because that's his whole thing, right? Silent strength. And his first act after that, taking on Anakin, because he made a promise. He said he'd train him, and Obi-Wan takes that kind of thing seriously. That's one of the first clues to who Obi-Wan really is. He didn't train Anakin out of some chosen one hype. He did it because someone he loved asked him to. And when you break it down, Obi-Wan's entire life kind of runs on that same fuel, loyalty. He doesn't always agree with the Council. He doesn't even always agree with Anakin, but he shows up anyway. Even when he's outmatched, outnumbered, or just plain tired of everything, he still shows up. And yeah, he wasn't the strongest Force user. He wasn't the fastest. But in terms of pure discipline, dude was a wall. He'd wait you out. He'd hold the line. You could be flipping around like a caffeinated acrobat, and Obi-Wan would still be there, blocking every hit like, "Are you done?" He lived it. He made patience a weapon. And he had a quiet kind of confidence too. Not arrogance, he wasn't strutting around, but that inner kind of, I've seen worse, calm. He never needed to shout or grandstand. He could walk into a room full of separatist leaders and just stand there like, "General Kenobi," the memes write themselves. But really, you start to appreciate Obi-Wan more when you realize how often he got thrown into completely hopeless situations. Like, his entire resume is just sent into disaster, somehow walks out alive, got left to die by Count Dooku, escaped, got shot down over Utapau, climbed out, crashed onto a planet with General Grievous, killed him. Anakin turned into a dark side volcano god, still managed to walk away. He wasn't lucky, he just always found a way to stay calm, make a plan, and survive. That's Jedi core strength. The Jedi Council didn't always appreciate him the way they should have. You know how some people get promoted because they talk a lot and make themselves look important. Obi-Wan wasn't like that. He never played politics. He just kept doing the work. While others were arguing about prophecies and Senate loyalty, Obi-Wan was out there, fixing mess after mess, usually alone or with Anakin yelling in his ear. And speaking of Anakin, man, their relationship was messy, like siblings and best friends and co-workers all at once with lightsabers. Obi-Wan wasn't just his teacher, he was the one holding the leash while the rest of the galaxy prayed Anakin wouldn't break it. And you could tell, deep down, Obi-Wan loved him. Not in the Jedi Code sanitized way, but like an older brother who knows this kid is going to drive him crazy, and possibly destroy the living room, but he still shows up to every game anyway. Even when Anakin ignored advice, broke rules, or straight up committed war crimes in emotional 4K, Obi-Wan didn't give up on him. This early Obi-Wan, the one who picked up the weight of Qui-Gon's death, took on a way too powerful Padawan and just kept his head down and did the job. That's the core of who he was. He didn't get distracted by power or politics. He was the guy with the clean robes, the dry humor, the tired eyes, and the lightsaber that never missed a beat. Jedi to the core, but in his own steady, no-flash, all-substance kind of way. And you know what? That's why he lasted so long. The Jedi were falling apart around him, and Obi-Wan just stayed. While everyone else lost their grip, Anakin to emotion, the Council to arrogance, he held the line. Silent guardian, unshakable wall, kind of like the guy in the group project, who does all the work while everyone else argues in a group chat. The thing with Obi-Wan during the war is, he didn't really want to be a general, at all. He was a peacekeeper, not some trench warfare strategist, but he adapted fast, probably because he didn't have a choice. You could drop Obi-Wan into the middle of a battlefield with a paperclip and a half-charged comlink, and somehow he'd still outmaneuver 4 separatist battalions and be sipping tea on the way home. That's the kind of Jedi he was. Never asked for the spotlight, never made it about him, but quietly crushed whatever nightmare situation they handed him. But here's where things got really complicated. War changes people, even Jedi, and Obi-Wan had to walk this insanely thin line, leading troops into battle, while also trying to hold on to those Jedi ideals of peace, patience, and compassion, which is honestly kind of hilarious when you think about it. Yes, here's your clone army, your lightsaber, your dusty robe, now go teach peace through explosions. He did it, though, and the clones, they respected him because he treated them like people. He knew they weren't just numbers, he actually listened to them, he called them by name, he joked with them. You hear stories of generals who wouldn't even look their clones in the eye. And then there's Obi-Wan, probably eating a ration bar with Cody in a trench and making some dry comment about the mud. And let's talk about Cody real quick. Commander Cody and Obi-Wan had that rare kind of mutual trust. They were like a really competent sitcom duo, Cody with his sarcasm, Obi-Wan with his dry humor. But underneath all that, they had each other's backs in a way that was actually kind of touching. Now, while all this is going down, battles, planetary invasions, Obi-Wan's also trying to keep Anakin from flying straight off a dark side cliff. And honestly, that might have been harder than fighting Grievous. Anakin was becoming more powerful, more impulsive and emotional. And Obi-Wan's over here trying to be the responsible older brother, the therapist, the battle-hardened general, and a Jedi Master all at once. He's barely sleeping. He's dealing with Senate pressure, war politics, missions every other day. And meanwhile, Anakin's out here slicing people in half and secretly marrying senators. Normal stuff, and Obi-Wan knew. He wasn't dumb. He didn't have the full picture, but he felt it. He saw Anakin unraveling. Maybe not all at once, but little pieces falling away. And the worst part, he couldn't stop it. Because every time he tried to reach Anakin, the war would rip them apart again. They'd just patch things up, maybe have one moment of real friendship again, and another mission, another crisis, another lightsaber duel, with someone who has more arms than sense. You can feel that tension building through the whole Clone Wars. Obi-Wan's doing everything he can to keep the Republic from collapsing, but deep down, you can tell he knows this is a house of cards. The Jedi are stretched too thin, the clones are dying in every campaign, and the Order's turning into something colder, more militarized, less spiritual, less Jedi. And Obi-Wan's trying to hold the line through all of it. He's not perfect, he has moments where he doubts, where he questions, but he never stops trying. And honestly, he's probably one of the only Jedi who kept a grip on what the Order was supposed to be about. He didn't lose himself in politics or war fever. He didn't chase power or revenge. He just kept doing his duty, even when it was soul-crushing. There's this mission on Umbara, one of the darkest arcs in the war, where the clones are being sent to die under a Jedi general who's basically lost his mind. And Obi-Wan? He's on the other side of the conflict, stuck in a position where he doesn't even know what's going on with his troops until it's too late. That's the kind of pressure he was under constantly. Spread thin, always trying to do right, but forced to trust a system that was cracking at the seams. And here we are, that moment that changed everything. That moment when all fell apart. I won't repeat myself what happened since we covered this part in Anakin's arc, but let's speak about Obi-Wan's inner conflicts. Obi-Wan lost his friends, brothers, the Order, everything. So what does he do? He disappears, heads off into the middle of nowhere, watching over Luke. That's it, just a hut in the desert, a pair of old binoculars, and the weight of every single failure on his back. He's not waiting for redemption, he's just trying to make sure the last spark of hope doesn't get snuffed out. He never fully gave up. Not on Anakin, not on the Jedi, not even on himself. For 20 years, he stayed in exile, blending in, surviving Tusken raids, avoiding Inquisitors, hiding from the Empire. Quiet, invisible, but always there, waiting for the right moment to do something that mattered again. And when Luke was finally ready, Obi-Wan didn't hesitate. He dusted off the lightsaber, got the old spark back, and stepped right into the fire. And sure, by that point he was older, slower, probably hadn't stretched in a decade. That's the thing with Obi-Wan. His whole story isn't about grand victories. It's about holding on when everything falls apart. Quiet strength, relentless duty, and yeah, sadness too. He probably lived with more regret than most Jedi combined. But he never let it stop him. He never let it turn him cold. He didn't become bitter or cruel. He stayed kind, patient, steady and right to the end. You ask why he's ranked so high? Why he's sitting solid at number 4? It's because he was the glue, the one who held the whole thing together while it crumbled around him. He trained Anakin. He trained Luke, kinda. He survived the Clone Wars, the Jedi Fall, the Empire. And he never turned away from who he was. He didn't need to be the most powerful. He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed to help. And honestly, that might be the most Jedi thing of all. Okay, so let's finally talk about Obi-Wan's power. Because for some reason, people always treat him like he's just the patient one. Like, yeah, he was calm and disciplined and all that, but let's not pretend like he wasn't insanely skilled on top of that. This guy duels Count Dooku multiple times. Lives to tell the tale. That's not normal. Dooku was one of the best lightsaber duelists ever. Former Jedi Master, literally had the most elegant, precise form of saber combat in the Order. Obi-Wan doesn't beat him, fair, but surviving and fighting back as well as he did? That's a big deal. And then you get to Mustafar, the big showdown. Obi-Wan won the fight. I'm gonna stick to my opinion mentioned early. Yes, Obi-Wan won, and sure, Anakin was incredibly strong at that point, no doubt. But he wasn't at his best, not even close. He was full of rage, grief, confusion, just completely clouded by the dark side and everything it had done to him. It's like handing a loaded blaster to someone who's having a breakdown. Dangerous, absolutely. Focused? Not even a little. Anakin had power, but he wasn't thinking clearly. He was emotional, aggressive, and charging forward without really seeing what was happening. And does that take anything away from Obi-Wan? Not at all. Because Obi-Wan was calm, focused, tactical. That alone, that ability to think in a fight, can sometimes be more powerful than brute strength. He wasn't stronger than Anakin, but he didn't need to be. He let Anakin burn himself out. He let him make the mistakes. And when the time came, he took the shot. Cold, clean, and heartbreaking. It wasn't just a fight. It was the result of everything that led up to it. Obi-Wan didn't win with muscles, he won with control. Obi-Wan knew Anakin. He knew how he moved, how he thought. And he used that, because that's the kind of fighter he was. Tactical, efficient, and patient. Obi-Wan didn't look powerful. He was efficient, precise. He made everything look clean and controlled. So when people say he wasn't the most powerful, they're really just saying he didn't show off. Because when you look at his actual record, it's stacked. He beat Darth Maul. Maul, who was trained specifically to kill Jedi, who came back from death out of sheer spite, who basically turned into a walking revenge mission. Obi-Wan finished that fight. Clean, sharp, efficient, like he always does. He stood against Ventress, Grievous, Savage Opress, and even held his own against Darth Vader in his older years. And that last fight, that wasn't him being weak. That was him choosing to end it on his terms. And let's talk force power. No, Obi-Wan didn't do crazy lightning blasts or send ships flying through the air. But that doesn't mean he was weak in the Force. He was refined. He had sharp intuition, Force-enhanced reflexes. He could sense danger, read minds, influence thoughts. He just didn't go around flexing it every 5 seconds. You remember how hard it is to force push Grievous? Obi-Wan does it casually. How many Jedi could survive a jump into a pile of droids and still come out swinging? Obi-Wan did that regularly. He was the master of Form 3, which is all about defense, precision, outlasting your opponent. It's not as flipping around like Yoda or spinning sabers like Anakin, but it works, and in Obi-Wan's hands, it worked better than anyone. He turned that form into a wall you just couldn't break through, and honestly, that's why he ranks above so many others. It's not just what he could do, it's how he used it. He had power, but he didn't let it define him. He had every excuse to go dark, to give in, to snap, but he didn't. He never lost his grip. You line him up next to other Jedi, and yeah, maybe he doesn't have Yoda's raw age and wisdom, or Anakin's insane midichlorian count, or Mace's power balance edge-walking lightsaber style. But Obi-Wan's got something none of them really had: absolute consistency. He never fell, he never cracked. He stayed loyal to the Jedi when everything around him fell apart. And even when he was alone in the desert, completely forgotten, he still kept the spark alive. That takes strength, not the kind you measure in force pushes or acrobatics, but the kind that actually lasts. If you think of it, every generation of Skywalkers went through him in some way. That's not a coincidence. He wasn't the loudest or strongest, he was the most Jedi. And in the end, that might be the rarest kind of power there is. Mace Windu is one of those Jedi that everyone knows is powerful, but nobody quite knows what to make of him. Like, you watch him for 5 minutes and think, this guy could end the war before lunch, but at the same time, you wouldn't exactly call him warm or easy to talk to. He's not the Jedi you go to when you're feeling confused about your feelings. He's the guy you go to when you need something handled and you don't want any loose ends. From the outside, Mace almost looks like what the Jedi wanted the rest of the Order to be. Calm, powerful, unshakable. But when you dig a little deeper, you start realizing he wasn't like the others at all. The guy was constantly walking a razor-thin line between light and dark, and somehow he never slipped. That alone is wild. Mace was born Force-sensitive, like a lot of Jedi, but what made him stand out early on was that he had this raw intensity. Even as a Padawan, he wasn't the type to just sit around doing meditation drills for 8 hours. He wanted to act, and not out of impulse or emotion, more like he just couldn't stand the idea of things being out of balance. Chaos bothered him. Injustice physically annoyed him. So instead of just reciting the Jedi code like a robot, Mace decided to make himself the enforcer of it. And he trained like it too. He didn't coast on natural talent. He wasn't just some Jedi wunderkind like Anakin. Mace worked for everything. His lightsaber form, Varpad, that wasn't something he found in a book. He created it. Which, by the way, is insane. Imagine being like, yeah, I don't vibe with any of these 7 traditional lightsaber styles, I'm just going to invent my own real quick. And it worked really well. But here's where it gets really interesting. Varpad wasn't just spins and aggressive counters, it was risky. It actually required you to channel your opponent's darkness. To draw in their rage, reflect it, and loop it back on them. You can see where that starts getting sketchy for a Jedi, right? It's kind of like trying to block fire with fire and hoping you don't get burned. And that's what makes Mace Windu so different. He mastered a style that flirted with the dark side every time he used it, and he never lost control. That takes more than strength. That takes ridiculous mental discipline. Like, think about how many Jedi fell over far less than that. Anakin got moody and murdered a temple. Dooku read one book he wasn't supposed to and jumped ship. Meanwhile, Mace is out here absorbing Sith-level rage during lightsaber fights and then going back to council meetings like nothing happened. Now, let's talk about the council. Mace was second only to Yoda, and honestly, some people in the Order probably saw him as the real leader, not because he had more wisdom than Yoda, but because he was the one who acted. If something needed doing, something hard, something messy, they usually looked at Mace. Yoda was the soul of the Jedi, Mace was the spine, and yeah, sometimes that made him come off as cold. He could be blunt, even harsh, especially toward Anakin. We'll get to that mess. But that attitude came from pressure. Mace wasn't just trying to follow the Jedi code, he was trying to protect it. And at the time, he was seeing it get torn apart from all sides. Corruption in the Senate, clones in the war, Jedi being stretched too thin, and Anakin doing, well, Anakin things. Mace felt that weight more than most, and his reaction was to tighten control, hold the line, because in his mind, if he cracked, even for a second, it was over. and it almost worked. He held the Jedi together longer than anyone else could have, even when they were being turned into generals, forced into war, and pushed to bend rules they'd held sacred for centuries. Mace stayed rigid. He refused to let the Order slip into chaos. Whether or not you agree with that approach, it's hard not to respect how committed he was to keeping it all from falling apart. Now, personality-wise, he's definitely not everyone's favourite. Mace wasn't charming like Obi-Wan, wisecracking like Ahsoka, or soft-spoken like Plo Koon. He was serious, intense, and didn't waste time on anything he didn't see as important. You didn't get the sense he liked being feared, but he definitely didn't mind it either. He knew his presence was heavy, and he used that to keep people in line. But what people sometimes miss is that Mace actually had a deep sense of compassion. It just didn't show up as hugs and pep talks. It showed up as doing the hard thing when no one else wanted to. He carried the Order on his back, he took the heat, and he made choices that cost him personally, so the bigger picture wouldn't collapse. You don't do that unless you care. By the time Revenge of the Sith rolls around, Mace is basically running damage control 24/7. He's trying to root out Palpatine, hold the Jedi together, keep an eye on Anakin, and still somehow fight a galactic war. And you can tell, it's wearing him down. He's got that constant, one more emergency, and I swear I'm moving to Dagobah, but he doesn't quit. He keeps going. And when the time finally comes, when he learns Palpatine is the Sith Lord they've been hunting for years, Mace doesn't hesitate. He grabs his saber, gathers a strike team, and goes to do what no one else had the nerve to do. Now here's where the debate always comes in. Did Mace actually beat Sidious? Or was Sidious playing the long game again? Honestly, the second option makes a lot of sense. Let's break it down. First off, Sidious opens that duel by blitzing 3 Jedi Masters so fast it's kind of embarrassing. Kit Fisto, Agen Kola, Saisi Teen, all wiped out in like 10 seconds. These weren't rookies, these were Jedi Council members. That's not a fluke. That's Sidious showing just how fast and lethal he really is when he turns it on. And then suddenly he's struggling with Mace? Now don't get me wrong, Mace was a beast. Varpad, perfect control, insane combat discipline. Yeah, he could go toe-to-toe with just about anyone. But when Sidious gets disarmed and goes full helpless mode, it doesn't feel right. His performance goes from unstoppable Sith hurricane to sad grandpa with a melted face in like 5 seconds. It feels like a setup, like he wanted Anakin to walk in on that exact moment. And it worked. Anakin shows up, sees Mace about to land the killing blow, and instantly starts spiraling. Not because he thinks Sidious is a good guy. No, Anakin knows he's a Sith. But what Sidious offers is the one thing Anakin can't walk away from. Now here's the wild part. If Palpatine had been truly beaten in that fight, none of that happens. Anakin wouldn't have turned. The Jedi would have survived. The Empire never rises. But Palpatine didn't care about losing a duel. He cared about winning the war. And the war was for Anakin's soul. So, when Mace raises his blade to finish it, he's doing what any Jedi would. Stop the Sith, protect the Republic. But he doesn't realize the real trap is already sprung. He's standing at the edge of Anakin's tipping point. And Sidious knows it. So what does that say about his power? Honestly, a lot. Because even if Sidious was holding back, he still needed to bait Mace Windu to pull off his ultimate plan. That's how much respect he had for the guy. He knew Mace wasn't going to turn. He wasn't going to hesitate. He was going to end it. And that scared Sidious more than any lightsaber. Mace Windu was dangerous because he couldn't be manipulated. He didn't care about titles or promises or prophecies. He saw a Sith Lord and moved to end it. That's the thing about Mace, the kind of strength that doesn't blink when the galaxy is falling apart. He was the Jedi Code but weaponized, and that's why he was both so effective and so easy to use. Because the Jedi Code, by that point, had already started to fail. It couldn't keep up with the tricks and shadows Palpatine was throwing around. And Mace? He was the last one still trying to hold it all together with sheer force of will. He came closer than anyone to stopping everything, but he was too loyal to a broken system. Now let's talk about power, because if you're ranking Jedi and you don't include Mace Windu near the top, you're just not being honest. He created his own saber form. He could tap into the darkness without falling into it. He was second only to Yoda on the Council, and he never once betrayed the Jedi Code, even when it would have been easier to do so. Mace was powerful, the discipline, the restraint, the way he could operate under enormous pressure without losing himself. That's what separates him from Jedi like Anakin. He was the wall between the Republic and full-blown chaos. And for a while, he held the line. He came closer than anyone to stopping the rise of the Empire. He walked the tightrope between light and dark and never once slipped. And if you needed one Jedi to walk into the dark and come out standing, you called Mace. Alright, so let's talk about Qui-Gon Jinn. If there's one Jedi who really doesn't fit the typical mold, it's this guy. He's like the rebellious philosopher of the Order. The Jedi who shows up, calmly nods at the Council, then quietly does his own thing anyway. When you watch The Phantom Menace, you probably notice right away that Qui-Gon isn't your everyday Jedi Knight. The guy's got this laid-back confidence, but also this sharp edge of seriousness underneath. He's not cracking jokes or delivering inspirational speeches. Instead, he's talking about the Force like it's this living, breathing presence, not just some energy field Jedi used to pull off cool tricks. That's the big thing about Qui-Gon. He's all about what they call the living Force. Basically, the Force as it flows through every moment, every choice, every breath of the galaxy. While most Jedi get wrapped up in the cosmic Force, which is more about destiny and the grand plan, Qui-Gon trusts what's happening right now. It's a subtle difference, but it shapes everything he does. Because of that, he often clashes with the Jedi Council. They like rules, traditions, careful planning. Qui-Gon, he's more of a gut feeler. If the Force tells him to jump off a cliff, he's asking questions later. And that makes the Council nervous. They don't like loose cannons, even if those loose cannons are really good with a lightsaber. Take how he trains Obi-Wan. Instead of pushing strict obedience or playing it safe, Qui-Gon encourages Obi-Wan to trust himself and follow the Force. He's giving Obi-Wan freedom, which is rare in the Order. Jedi aren't supposed to have that much freedom, at least not when it comes to big decisions. Qui-Gon's approach is a little wild for the Jedi way, but it works because Obi-Wan grows up learning how to think for himself. And this outsider status is both his strength and his curse. He knows the Jedi Order is too rigid, too focused on rules and politics, and not enough on the Force itself. Qui-Gon sees the cracks in the system years before anyone else. The arrogance, the blind spots, the unwillingness to adapt. But because he speaks up in a way that challenges the Council's authority, they push back. Remember how skeptical the Council was when Qui-Gon brought Anakin before them? And Qui-Gon, he doesn't argue much, but he's insistent. Like, trust me, this kid is special. The Force is with him. That insistence isn't just stubbornness. It's a deep faith in the Force's guidance. Qui-Gon listens to the Force, not just the Council. And that's what sets him apart. He's the first Jedi to really believe in the prophecy of the Chosen One, that this kid Anakin could bring balance to the Force. The Council, caught up in their bureaucracy and caution, is hesitant. Now, the really interesting thing is that Qui-Gon's way of thinking foreshadows a lot of the Jedi Order's downfall. The Order is so invested in control and predictability that it misses the bigger picture. Qui-Gon's outside perspective, his ability to hear the Force's subtle messages, is a warning sign that the Jedi are getting too rigid. He's basically waving a big red flag that says, the way we're doing things isn't working anymore. And that's why he's so important in the grand scheme of things, even if his screen time is limited. Qui-Gon's belief in the living Force, his trust in Anakin, and his willingness to challenge the Council set off a chain reaction. Without him, Anakin probably never gets trained. Without Anakin, there's no Darth Vader. Without Darth Vader, no Empire. Without all that, no Luke Skywalker, and no original trilogy. Qui-Gon's legacy is huge. He's like the first domino to fall in a very complicated line. And even though he's the outsider, he's also the seed from which everything grows. So yeah, the Jedi Order might not have loved him. The Council might have thought he was a bit reckless. But Qui-Gon Jinn was a Jedi who put the Force first, above rules, politics and tradition. And in a galaxy that was about to fall apart, that was maybe the most Jedi thing you could do. Alright, let's get into the nuts and bolts of Qui-Gon Jinn's power. First thing, Qui-Gon was the steady hand in the storm. If you think of Jedi powers like tools in a toolbox, Qui-Gon knew exactly which ones to pull out and when, never wasting effort or energy. One of the first places to start is his lightsaber style. Qui-Gon was a master of Form 3, the same as Obi-Wan. If you don't know much about the forms, Soresu is the ultimate defensive stance. Picture a Jedi standing calm, lightsaber like a shield, parrying every blow, deflecting blaster bolts, and wearing down the attacker by making them miss and exhaust themselves. This style fits Qui-Gon perfectly because he's not rushing into fights or trying to overpower opponents with sheer force. He understands that sometimes the best offense is a good defense. And with Soresu, he's built to last, outlasting his enemies until the right moment comes to strike. If you've watched The Phantom Menace, you saw this in the duel against Darth Maul. That fight's nuts. Double-bladed lightsabers, crazy acrobatics, and lots of back and forth action. Qui-Gon wasn't the flashiest combatant there, but he was the most measured. Every parry, every block was calculated, buying him time and space. Unfortunately, the fight didn't end well for him. But up until that point, he was holding his own against one of the most aggressive Sith warriors out there. But lightsaber skill is just one part of his power. As we said earlier, Qui-Gon's real strength is his connection to the Force, especially the living Force. That idea that the Force is a constant living presence, flowing through every moment, every creature, every breath. This connection gave Qui-Gon senses that went way beyond normal Jedi intuition. He could sense danger before it happened, read people's true intentions, and follow subtle clues that others missed. For example, when Qui-Gon finds Anakin on Tatooine, it's not just luck or coincidence. It's him tuning into the Force's whispers and trusting that pull. That kind of connection is rare and hard to teach, but Qui-Gon lived it every day. It made him stand apart from other Jedi who were more focused on rules, dogma, and politics. Speaking of politics, Qui-Gon's power also showed in how he handled people. Qui-Gon had a way of commanding respect without raising his voice. He wasn't pushy or aggressive, but people listened because he spoke with calm conviction and deep wisdom. That kind of presence is a form of power too, the kind that can calm a tense room or persuade an enemy to see reason. And let's talk a bit about his Force powers. He used the Force to enhance his combat, sure, but also for things like mind tricks, enhanced perception, and subtle healing. His style was never, "Look at me." It was always about getting the job done quietly and efficiently. One of the most impressive things about Qui-Gon is that he was the first Jedi to learn how to become a Force ghost after death. That's huge. It means his mastery over the Force wasn't just about life. He found a way to keep his consciousness, his knowledge, and his guidance alive after his physical body was gone. This discovery changed everything for the Jedi, allowing them to pass wisdom down even from beyond the grave. Imagine that, a Jedi so connected to the Force that death wasn't the end, just a new phase of existence. That kind of power and insight, it's rare, and it speaks volumes about Qui-Gon's depth as a Jedi. On top of all this, Qui-Gon had a remarkable ability to stay calm under pressure. Whether negotiating with Queen Amidala, facing off against Sith assassins, or exploring mysterious planets, Qui-Gon never lost his cool. That calmness isn't just personality, it's a product of his deep Force connection and years of experience. And that steadiness makes him dangerous in a fight and effective in a crisis. So, putting it all together, Qui-Gon was good, really good. He might not always be the first Jedi name people shout when talking about the strongest, but he definitely deserves a spot near the top. He's the quiet force behind some of the biggest changes in the galaxy, a master swordsman with a calm demeanor, and a spiritual guide who still influences Jedi decades after his death. Let's talk about Ahsoka, the one who started off as Snips, Anakin Skywalker's surprise Padawan that nobody really asked for, and ended up becoming one of the most important Force users in the entire galaxy. Her arc is wild, and if you only know her from a few cameos here and there, then buckle in, because her story is way bigger than most people realize. So let's rewind a bit. When Ahsoka first shows up during the Clone Wars, she's introduced to Anakin by Yoda himself. And Anakin, he's not thrilled. He's like, "Wait, I'm getting a Padawan? Since when?" And Ahsoka, being who she is, immediately challenges him. She's confident, mouthy, and way too eager for her own good. It's kind of hilarious, actually. The two of them clash instantly, but that's what makes them such a great team. You got to remember, the Clone Wars were complete chaos. Jedi were being pulled into battles left and right, thrown into military leadership roles they weren't really trained for. Ahsoka didn't get the peaceful Jedi Temple experience. No long meditations or dusty library time. She was thrown right into the war zone. Her first mission with Anakin? A full-on assault to rescue Jabba the Hutt's kidnapped son. So yeah, no warm-up, just lightsabers out, let's go. But here's the thing about Ahsoka, She adapts like really fast. At just 14 years old, she was already commanding clone troopers, making split-second battlefield decisions and dealing with pressure most adults would crack under. And yeah, she made mistakes, lots of them. But she learned, she grew, and through it all, she started forming her own ideas about what it actually meant to be a Jedi. A lot of that came from Anakin. He didn't train her by the book. He taught her to think creatively, bend the rules when necessary, and trust her instincts, even when they went against orders. That mentorship made her into a Jedi who wasn't just skilled with a saber, but someone who questioned things. You could already see the difference between her and the other Padawans. While most young Jedi were still focused on reciting the code and nodding in agreement with the Council, Ahsoka was out there, making moral calls in the middle of battles, weighing right and wrong in real time, and refusing to accept, because the Council said so, as a good enough answer. And that, of course, led to the big turning point in her story. Later in the war, the Jedi Temple gets bombed, people die, and it's awful. And when the Order starts investigating, they decide to point the finger at Ahsoka, one of their own, a teenager who had risked her life countless times for the Republic. They straight up arrest her, strip her of her rank, and toss her into a cell like she's some sort of criminal. Even when there were gaps in the evidence, even when Anakin begged them to reconsider, they didn't believe her. Let that sink in for a second. After all she had done, after leading clone battalions, fighting beside masters, showing courage again and again, they tossed her aside like it was nothing. And the worst part? The whole thing turned out to be a setup. She was innocent. The real bomber was someone else entirely. Now here's where Ahsoka shows her true strength. She walks away. That's a huge moment, maybe one of the biggest in the entire saga. And you know why it's so powerful? Because Ahsoka loved being a Jedi. She believed in the Force, in helping others, in doing the right thing. But the people running the Order had shown her that they couldn't always be trusted. They were more concerned with politics and appearances than justice. And if they could turn on her so quickly, then what else were they blind to? That decision, to walk away, that's what defines her. Not her lightsaber skills, not her battlefield victories. It's the moment she chose to follow her own sense of what's right, even when it meant stepping away from the only life she'd ever known. She didn't stop helping people. She didn't turn her back on the Force. She just stopped pretending the Order had a monopoly on morality. And honestly, she was right, because everything starts to fall apart not long after that. The Jedi Council continues to lose touch. The clones turn on them, and the Republic collapses into the Empire. And there's Ahsoka, technically not a Jedi anymore, but living the Jedi ideals better than most of the ones still wearing robes. So, you'd think walking away from the Jedi Order would be the end of Ahsoka's story, right? I mean, she's what, 17? Maybe 18? And already she's had a lifetime's worth of betrayal, battlefield stress, and identity crises. But Ahsoka's journey was just getting started. If anything, her story really kicks into gear once she ditches the robes and goes rogue. Now here's the thing. She doesn't just disappear into some quiet corner of the galaxy and open a fruit stand. She could have. No one would have blamed her. But instead, she stays involved. She listens to the Force, keeps her lightsabers nearby, and continues to fight for what she believes in, just without the politics and the Jedi bureaucracy breathing down her neck. And then we get to the Siege of Mandalore. This is peak Clone Wars era. Maul has taken over Mandalore. Things are a total mess. And Ahsoka gets pulled back into the fight. Anakin hands her back her lightsabers, which by the way he tuned up for her, which is actually kinda sweet. And she leads a battalion of clone troopers into one of the biggest battles of the war. Not just any clones either. The 501st, his battalion. And they paint their helmets orange to match her face markings, like a badge of loyalty. That's how much she means to them. She's not their general anymore, but they still follow her without question. That says a lot about her leadership. And on Mandalore, Ahsoka absolutely crushes it. She faces off against Darth Maul, a full-blown former Sith Lord who's still a nightmare to fight, and she holds her own like a pro. That duel is insane. Maul's throwing everything he's got at her, and Ahsoka's not just surviving, she's reading him, outsmarting him. She beats him without falling into the trap of using rage or aggression. She wins by staying centered and calm. She's not fueled by ego or revenge, she just knows who she is. But right after the battle ends, everything turns upside down. The Jedi are cooked. But Ahsoka, she senses the shift. She feels it. And thanks to her connection to the clones, especially Rex, she manages to stay one step ahead, just barely. From there, she fakes her death, literally buries her lightsabers, leaves behind the only identity she's ever known, again. And then, she vanishes. For a long time, she's just gone. People think she's dead. The Jedi are extinct. The galaxy slips into full-blown Empire mode, and the few survivors are either in hiding or being hunted. But even in that chaos, Ahsoka doesn't give up. She lays low, sure, but she doesn't stop listening to the Force. She lives under fake names, helps small communities, gets involved quietly, behind the scenes, and eventually, she resurfaces. Not in a big, I'm back kind of way, more like a, hey, someone has to do something and it might as well be me kind of way. And that's how she gets wrapped up in the early stages of the rebellion. She becomes Fulcrum, a secret intelligence agent feeding info to the rebel cells, coordinating movements, helping people fight back. She's not waving a lightsaber around or calling herself a Jedi. She's just doing the work. That's kind of her thing. She doesn't care about titles or recognition. She just wants to help. It's worth saying, this phase of her life is where Ahsoka proves she doesn't need a Jedi Council, a title, or even a lightsaber to be a Jedi in spirit. She lives by the code more than most of the people who sat on the council ever did. And she does it quietly, humbly, out of pure conviction. She's one of the few characters who lived through everything. The fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, the end of the Clone Wars. And somehow, through all of it, she never gave in to fear, anger, or bitterness. Even after being betrayed by the people she trusted most, she never turned cold. By the time she shows up again, during the rebellion era, she's not some lost Padawan anymore. She's a symbol. People look to her for hope. They don't even care that she's not a Jedi anymore. She's something more, something real. A survivor who refused to let the dark win, even when it would have been easier. Alright, let's talk about Ahsoka's power. Because honestly, Ahsoka is one of the most skilled and versatile Force users in Star Wars. And the crazy thing is, she did it all without the Jedi Council ever officially recognizing her as a knight. Kind of awkward for them, huh? Let's start with combat, because let's be real, that's where she shines right away. Ahsoka is an absolute monster in lightsaber dueling. She's not just swinging a blade and hoping for the best. She developed her own two-saber style early on, wielding a reverse grip for most of the Clone Wars. That alone made her unpredictable to fight against. Most Jedi stick to traditional stances and forms. Ahsoka flipped that literally and made it her signature. One Shoto blade, one regular, fluid, aggressive, but still controlled, and over time she refined it. By the time we see her again in Rebels, she's switched to a more traditional grip. But the dual sabers stayed, and she's even sharper than before. Now in terms of form, she's kind of a hybrid. She studied Form 4, Ataru, the same as Yoda and Quinlan Vos, which is all about agility, flips, speed, movement, very acrobatic, and it suits her perfectly. You watch her move, and it's like she's dancing through the fight. But she also borrows a lot from Form 5, Gemso, especially later on. That style's more about counter-attacking with power, and it makes sense. She learned from Anakin, and that was his preferred form. You can really see that influence when she goes toe-to-toe with someone like Maul or even Vader. Let's talk about the Maul fight on Mandalore for a second. That's not just one of the best lightsaber duels in Star Wars, it's one of the best period. Ray Park came back to do the motion capture for Maul, and you can tell. That duel was fast, brutal, and technical, and Ahsoka held her own like a seasoned master. She outplayed him, used the environment, stayed calm, and then there's the Vader duel. Now, this is probably the heaviest fight in her whole arc, emotionally and physically. She's standing across from her former master, who's now basically a dark side tank in armor, and she doesn't back down for a second. She fights him evenly, which is absolutely insane when you realize that Anakin, as Vader, is stronger than ever physically. And Ahsoka still matches him, step for step, hit for hit. She even cracks his helmet, which, yeah, that's no small thing. That moment alone says a lot about her strength, both in combat and in spirit. But combat is just half the picture. Ahsoka is powerful in the Force too, though in a different way than, say, someone like Yoda or Mace Windu. She doesn't throw planets around or rip ships out of the sky. Her Force powers are more grounded, practical, and, let's be honest, way more her. She's got precision. She uses the Force to enhance her reflexes, her speed, her perception. In a fight, it's like she sees what's coming before it happens. Not because of flashy foresight visions or prophecy stuff, just instinct, honed through years of survival. She's also insanely stealthy. Ahsoka can drop off the grid like a ghost. During the Imperial era, she's helping build the rebellion, slipping past Inquisitors, and no one even knows where she is half the time. That kind of quiet Force control, using it to mask your presence, stay calm, slip in and out unnoticed, it takes serious discipline. Not dramatic, but incredibly effective. And she can hold her own against Inquisitors, no problem. Actually, she doesn't just survive them, she embarrasses them. That duel in the forest in Tales of the Jedi, she disarms an Inquisitor in like 10 seconds, and she's not even using her lightsabers at the start. That's how sharp her instincts and timing are. She's so fluid in those moments that it barely even looks like she's trying. Now here's the part people sometimes miss. Ahsoka's connection to the Force is strong. She's not someone who taps into it for drama or raw power. She listens to it. She follows it. Her strength comes from being in balance, even when everything around her is chaos. She doesn't get swept up in rage. She doesn't go full dark side for the greater good. She stays centered. And that, honestly, is a power a lot of Jedi wish they had. Alright, let's just get this out of the way because we both know it's coming. A lot of people don't like Rey, or the whole sequel trilogy, or honestly, anything that happened in Star Wars after 1983. And I get it. Some folks feel like her character showed up out of nowhere, picked up a lightsaber, and suddenly she's doing flips and beating Sith Lords without breaking a sweat. The pacing was weird, the writing jumped around, and some moments just felt off. But if we strip all of that away, like if we just look at Rey as a character in her own right, not the marketing, not the trilogy's structure, just her as a person in this galaxy, you start to see her differently. And yeah, that sounds like a big claim, but stay with me. She was just a scavenger on Jakku, living in the wreckage of a galaxy that fell apart decades ago, counting every bite of food and trading junk to that weird fishman for half portions. And still, even without the Force stuff, Rey was tough. She was surviving on one of the most unforgiving planets out there, and doing it alone. No mentors, no safety net. That takes a kind of quiet strength that people don't always notice, but it's there. Rey's not just strong because she has the Force. She's strong because she had to be before the Force ever entered the picture. Then, of course, the galaxy starts spinning again. She meets Finn, then BB-8, then Han Solo of all people, and suddenly she's pulled into something way bigger than herself. Yesterday, she was fixing parts on a downed Star Destroyer. Now she's flying the Millennium Falcon, which, by the way, she flies like she's been piloting it for years. That's one of the first real hints that there's something deeper going on. The Force is waking up in her. It's subtle at first, but you can feel it. What I really like about Rey early on is how she doesn't just jump at the Jedi stuff. She's cautious. She doesn't want to be special. She's been abandoned, forgotten, left behind. She's built her whole life around not depending on anyone. So when the Force starts pulling at her, her instinct isn't excitement, it's resistance, which is honestly pretty relatable. Like, if someone showed up tomorrow and told you that you had ancient wizard powers and a destiny, you'd probably need a second to breathe too. But it doesn't take long before she's fully in it. Maz tells her to take the lightsaber. The Force starts calling her, and then Kylo Ren, with his whole edgy Vader wannabe vibe, tries to get inside her head. And what does she do? She pushes back, she turns it on him. And that right there is a major theme in Rey's story. Identity. Everyone's trying to tell her who she is. You're a nobody. You're a Palpatine. You're destined. You're dangerous. And through all of that noise, she slowly carves out her own path. She doesn't want to be a pawn in someone else's legacy. Not Luke's, not Palpatine's, not Ben Solo's. She wants to choose who she becomes. Which brings us to Luke. Now look, Luke in The Last Jedi is a lot. People either love that version or hate it. But from Rey's perspective, she shows up on this mysterious island, desperate for guidance, and the great Jedi hero she's been hearing about is just grumpy and drinking milk from a sea monster. It's awkward, but Rey sticks with it. She pushes him, questions him, and, again, finds her own strength in the process. And during her time with Luke, we start to see that Rey isn't just Force sensitive. She's deeply connected. The island, the tree, the ancient Jedi texts. She feels all of it, even without formal training. She doesn't need years in a temple to understand the Force. She listens to it. That scares Luke a little, honestly, because he sees the potential in her and the danger. But Rey doesn't run from that. She embraces it. Carefully, yeah, but fearlessly. She doesn't want power for the sake of it. She's not trying to be the next Jedi Master. She's just trying to help. She sees a galaxy in pain, and she wants to be part of the solution. That's why she doesn't turn when Kylo offers his hand. That's why she doesn't follow in Palpatine's footsteps when she learns the truth. She's powerful, sure, but her biggest strength is her heart. So what do you think, this all training stuff? Some people look at Rey's fast growth, her instant connection to the Force, and how quickly she picks things up, and they're like, come on, this feels rushed. Where's the struggle? Where's the training arc? It's not that Rey isn't interesting or worthy of being here. It's that sometimes the pacing makes it feel like she skipped a few steps that other Jedi had to crawl through. So let's get into it, Rey's power. And there's a lot of debate around this one. Honestly, it depends on how you look at it, but let's try to break it down properly. First off, you can't ignore the fact that Rey picks things up fast. Like, unusually fast. She gets her hands on a lightsaber for the first time in The Force Awakens, and a few hours later, she's holding her own against Kylo Ren. That's the moment where a lot of people kind of tilted their heads and went, wait, what? And yeah, if you're comparing her to someone like Luke, who took a whole trilogy to figure things out, or even Anakin, who had to go through years of training, Rey's timeline does feel fast. But that's kind of the point. The Force was awakening in her, kinda. And that's a key part of Rey's power. She meditates without being told. She senses things without being taught. That scene on Ahch-To where she's sitting on the rock, describing the island's life force, the decay, the light, the darkness, that's not beginner-level stuff. She's tapping into the essence of the Force with zero formal training. She gets it in a way that some Jedi Masters spend their whole lives trying to reach. Now, in combat, she's not just swinging randomly either. She starts with a staff, and it shows. Her early lightsaber form is all big, sweeping strikes. More defensive, more circular. She's not super refined yet, but she fights smart. She watches, she adjusts. She doesn't win by being the strongest. She reads her opponents and adapts. When she fights Kylo, for example, she doesn't overpower him. She outlasts him. He's injured, emotional, unfocused. She stays sharp, and that's what makes the difference. But by the time we hit the rise of Skywalker, she's evolved, big time. Now she's deflecting blaster bolts while running through obstacle courses, lifting entire starships out of quicksand, and doing high-level saber techniques with total confidence. She's also starting to do things we rarely see Jedi do, like Force healing. That's huge. Let's pause on that one for a second. Force healing, it's borderline myth in canon. It's not something most Jedi can do on command. Rey heals a giant snake creature underground, and then later heals Kylo Ren from a mortal wound. That's deep control. It means she understands life energy at a very personal level, enough to shift it from her own body into someone else's. But then there's the other side of her, the one tied to her lineage. And yeah, here comes the big twist. She's a Palpatine, granddaughter of the galaxy's worst grandpa, and suddenly a lot of her power starts to make more sense. That natural talent, the Force visions, the raw intensity, even the moment where she accidentally blasts a transport ship with Force lightning, all of that is tied to her bloodline. Now, whether you like that twist or not is another thing entirely, but in terms of lore, it fits. She's got Palpatine's blood, the same blood that produced Sidious, the most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history. And just like with Anakin, who had raw god-tier potential from birth, Rey's got power baked into her DNA. It's chaotic, it's unstable, and it's dangerous. But it's also real. The strength is there. She could lean into it, dominate, crush and rule. All of that is available to her. But she doesn't. She walks that line the entire time, knowing she could fall, knowing the easy path is right there, and still choosing to resist it. That's more impressive than any Force power you can name. Because in Star Wars, power's never really the problem. It's what you do with it. And speaking of power, let's talk about the big finale. The all the Jedi live in you now moment. She's standing in front of Palpatine, and for a second it looks like he's going to win. He's literally melting the Resistance fleet in the sky, and Rey, totally beaten down, reaches out with the Force, and the voices answer. This is where her strength peaks. She draws strength from every Jedi who came before her. Yoda, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, Mace, they all speak through the Force, lifting her up. There are so many memes about this moment, and writing the script now honestly makes me laugh. But you know, it's a symbolic moment. It's the ultimate payoff to her journey. She went from having no one to standing in front of evil, with the entire Jedi legacy behind her. Let's talk about Plo Koon. And yeah, if you're mostly into the movies, you probably don't know a ton about him. He's that quiet guy with the weird breathing mask who dies in like 2 seconds during Order 66. But if you only judge him by the films, you're seriously missing out. Because in the wider Star Wars universe, especially in the Clone Wars, Plo Koon is one of the most respected Jedi out there, by the clones, by the Council, by his fellow Jedi, and for good reason. Right away, Plo just gives off this calm, steady energy. He's not loud, not intense. He's not trying to be some big philosophical guy like Mace Windu or Yoda. He's just present. He listens and he thinks before he talks. And when he does speak, people actually pay attention, because you know whatever's about to come out of his mouth is going to be measured, honest, and probably worth remembering. But the first thing that really makes him stand out is how deeply compassionate he is, especially to the clones. This is something you see over and over again in the Clone Wars, and it's honestly a little heartbreaking. While some Jedi saw the clones as tools of war, or at best loyal soldiers, Plo saw them as people. He'd call them by name, he'd thank them, he'd check in on them as people, not assets, and the clones loved him for it. There's even that episode where his fleet gets destroyed, and he's floating in space with a bunch of troopers in escape pods. The Republic basically tells him to abandon the search for survivors. He refuses to leave them behind. It's a small moment, but it tells you everything you need to know about the guy. He doesn't leave anyone behind, not even in the middle of a war. That's part of why he gets so much respect from Jedi and troopers alike. He doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to show off. His leadership is built on trust, on consistency. You follow Plo Koon not because you're scared of him, but because you believe in him. Another thing that makes him interesting is his background. Plo comes from a species called the Kel Dor, and they have a very strong cultural emphasis on justice, fairness, and using power responsibly. That fits in perfectly with Jedi values, but for Plo, it's even deeper. It's not just a job, it's who he is. He sees the Jedi Code as a promise, not a rulebook. A promise to protect people. A promise to do what's right, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard. And honestly, that kind of moral clarity is rare, especially during the Clone Wars, when everything is so murky and complicated. A lot of Jedi lose their way. They get wrapped up in military politics, or start blurring the line between defense and aggression. But Plo never really slips like that. He stays centered. He doesn't get distracted by the power or the title. He remembers why he's there. He's also not afraid to speak his mind on the Council. He's not a loud rebel like Qui-Gon, but he will question things. He'll push back if something doesn't feel right. And the Council listens to him. Because again, when Plo talks, it's never about ego. He's not trying to win the argument. He's trying to do what's right. And speaking of Qui-Gon, it's worth noting that Plo Koon wasn't totally against Qui-Gon's listen to the living force approach. He respected it, even if he didn't always agree. He was open-minded, thoughtful, the kind of Jedi who could sit across from someone with a totally different view and actually hear them out. That kind of emotional intelligence? Pretty rare on the Council. Now, here's something a lot of people don't know. Plo Koon is actually the one who discovered Ashoka Tano. Not Anakin, not Obi-Wan, it's Plo. He found her when she was just a little kid and brought her to the Jedi Temple. And he didn't just drop her off and forget about her. He stayed involved. Ahsoka always remembered him as the Jedi who believed in her first. Even when she left the Order, she still had respect for Plo. That says a lot. It also ties into this running theme with Plo. He sees people's potential before they even see it in themselves, whether it's clones, Padawans, or even fellow Jedi. He's the guy who'll quietly invest in you. No big speech, no spotlight, just steady support, always in the background. And when it came to battle, Plo could throw down. He was no slouch in combat, not even close. He preferred to de-escalate things when he could, but when it came time to fight, he was quick, precise, and powerful. Not flashy like Anakin, Not acrobatic like Yoda, but deliberate, controlled, and deadly when he had to be. And that's why his death hits different. Now let's actually talk about Plo Koon's power. We're talking Force ability, lightsaber skill, battlefield presence, and how he stacked up against the other Jedi in a fight, all while still being the quietest guy in the room. So first, let's just clear something up. Plo Koon was strong. He just didn't act like it. You'd never see him strutting around the Jedi Temple, showing off or flexing his Force powers. He didn't have the attitude of someone trying to be the best, but that's what made him dangerous. He wasn't chasing power. He had it, and he used it when it mattered. In terms of Force sensitivity, Plo was absolutely high tier. He was one of the few Jedi Masters on the High Council for a reason. You don't just get there for being nice. His ability to sense through the Force was exceptional. He could detect life forms across long distances, sense disturbances with incredible clarity, and had a unique skill in Force empathy, especially with clones, which probably explains why he always treated them with such respect. He could feel people's emotions in a really deep, intuitive way. That made him an excellent battlefield commander, because he wasn't just reading tactics, he was reading people. Now in combat, Plo Koon was known for being direct and efficient. His lightsaber form is a little debated. Some sources say he primarily used Form 5, Xian Gem So, which is the same form Anakin used. That form's all about power strikes and aggressive counters. But unlike Anakin, who used it like a battering ram, Plo was calculated. He didn't waste movements. He didn't let emotion into it. His technique was clean, powerful, and disciplined. And remember, this guy survived battles in the Clone Wars that veterans didn't walk out of. He wasn't just sitting on the bridge giving orders. He was down there in the trenches, lightsaber out, holding the line. And not just once or twice, consistently. Plo Koon was often deployed in tough situations because the Republic trusted him to survive them. That's not something you give to a B-tier Jedi. He also had a few abilities that were, let's just say, not standard. Here's the wild one. In Legends, Plo Koon had access to a rare Force ability called Electric Judgment. And yeah, before you ask, that's basically Force lightning. But with a twist, it wasn't fueled by hate or aggression. It was a controlled version, used with intent and precision. He could channel energy in a non-lethal way, using it to stun or disable enemies rather than destroy them. And if you're wondering how a Jedi could get away with that, well, that's Plo Koon for you. He knew how to walk that line. Now, whether Electric Judgment is still considered canon is kind of up in the air. It hasn't shown up in modern material. But even without it, it shows something important, that Plo Koon was willing to think outside the box. He wasn't afraid of certain abilities just because they were considered dark. He judged tools by how they were used, not by who else had used them. And that's honestly kind of refreshing in a Jedi. His physicality was another major strength. Kel Dor physiology gave him a few advantages: stronger lungs, faster reflexes, and heightened senses. He always wore that signature mask, not because it looked cool, though let's be honest, it does, but because he couldn't breathe standard oxygen. But even with that constant barrier, he moved like a seasoned warrior, agile, strong, balanced. And it wasn't just about solo skill either. Plo was a team player in the truest sense. On the battlefield, he coordinated entire clone units like clockwork. He understood formation combat. He knew when to strike, when to retreat, when to hold the line. And his troops loved serving under him. Not because he was lenient, but because he was fair. And he always put their lives above the mission. That kind of loyalty? You can't force push your way into that. You earn it. But here's the part that really sets him apart from some of the stronger, more theatrical Jedi. Plo never let power define him. You know how some Jedi, like Anakin, start to see their abilities as part of their identity? I'm the chosen one. I'm the strongest. I have to do everything myself. Plo wasn't like that. He had all this power, but he used it with restraint. He didn't jump into fights unless he had to, and when he did, he ended them quickly. He never confused being powerful with being important, and honestly, in a council that was slowly losing its grip, that kind of humility was rare. A lot of Jedi, even well-meaning ones, started getting pulled into the politics and the war. They started seeing themselves as generals first, Jedi second. But Plo Koon never really lost the thread. Even in the heat of war, he was still centered, still calm, still connected to the people around him. Now, in terms of raw ranking, Like if we were stacking Jedi up based on power alone. He's not at Yoda's level, or Mace Windu's, or Anakin's, when Anakin is on a rage-fueled rampage, but he's probably right under that top tier. Somewhere in the very strong, extremely reliable, never makes mistakes category. He may not be the one to deliver the final blow, but he's the one you trust to get the job done without going off the rails. Alright, Ki-Adi-Mundi, let's talk about him. And let's be real, for most people, he's the guy with the tall forehead who yells, "What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?" He's in the background of a few scenes, shows up on the council a bunch, and you kind of wonder, wait, why was this guy such a big deal? But the truth is, Ki-Adi-Mundi's one of the more complicated Jedi in the Order, not because he did something wild or heroic, but because he represents the tension between thinking like a Jedi and acting like a military officer. And by the end of his story, you can see how that conflict kind of undoes him. Let's back it up though. Ki-Adi-Mundi was from the planet Syria, and right away his life was different from most Jedi. Unlike most kids who got picked up as infants, he actually joined the Jedi Order when he was about 4 years old, which, yeah, isn't super late, but still late enough that his attachment to home and family was probably a little stronger. Syrian culture was also very traditional and conservative, so his whole upbringing already had a layer of rigidity before he even got to Coruscant. But what's really unusual? The Jedi actually let him have a family. Yeah, no joke. He was granted special permission to marry and have kids, because his species had a dangerously low birth rate. So while the rest of the Jedi were out here saying, attachments are forbidden, Ki-Adi-Mundi had a wife, or wives, depending on which version you read, and kids, like 7 of them. And here's where it gets tricky, because he still preached the whole no attachment thing, like everyone else. He'd say the Jedi needed to stay emotionally detached, even though he literally had a home life. Which feels kind of hypocritical, right? Like, how do you sit on the council and tell Anakin he can't have feelings when you're literally FaceTiming your family between battles? It's that classic Jedi double standard, and Ki-Adi is the poster child for it. But even with all that, he was a respected Jedi Master. He was a Syrian Council member, one of the few non-humans to be granted that role at the time. And he was no slouch when it came to the Force. Highly intelligent, very measured, and genuinely skilled in telepathy, strategic thinking, and combat. He wasn't the most charismatic guy, but he was sharp, probably one of the most logical minds on the council. That logic, though, sometimes got him into trouble, because while he was really good at analysing things, he wasn't always great at reading people, especially when things didn't follow his sense of structure. A perfect example of this? His whole attitude during the Clone Wars. Now, to be fair, Ki-Adi-Mundi was a general during the war. He led clone troops, participated in frontline battles, and was often trusted with big missions. The guy knew how to plan, and he knew how to win. He was respected by the clones under him, and he never gave off the reckless vibe that some other Jedi had. But here's the issue. He got a little too comfortable with the system. He trusted the Republic, he trusted the Council, and he trusted that the war was the right thing to be fighting. Even when things got shady, like when Palpatine started grabbing more power, or when people like Ahsoka got falsely accused, Ki-Adi-Mundi didn't really question it. He stuck to the rules, to the plan. He was that guy in the meeting who always argued from the safe, official position. There's actually a really telling moment in the Clone Wars show, where Ahsoka's on trial for something she didn't do, and Ki-Adi is one of the Jedi who votes to expel her from the Order temporarily. He doesn't do it out of malice, but out of logic. We must follow procedure, that kind of thing. And that right there, that's the core of who he is. He does what he thinks is right, but it's based on structure, not instinct. And that works for a while, until it doesn't. Because eventually, when Order 66 happens, Ki-Adi's entire system collapses. He's out on the battlefield, leading troops on Megiddo, walking confidently, issuing commands like usual. And the moment Palpatine gives the order, blasters up, no hesitation. And the sad part, he has no idea it's coming. He's completely blindsided. He never really saw the cracks forming. He never expected betrayal. Even with all his logic and all his planning, he never imagined the Republic would be the thing that destroyed the Jedi. And that's the tragedy. Ki-Adi-Mundi wasn't evil. He wasn't corrupt. He wasn't arrogant like some Jedi who thought they were untouchable. He just played by the rules. And when the rules were rigged from the start, he never had a chance. You know what's kind of refreshing about Kanan? He didn't want to be a Jedi. Like, at all. He wasn't chasing glory or status or even some deep moral mission. He just wanted to survive. And honestly, can you blame him? He was still a kid, Caleb June back then, when Order 66 came crashing down. That moment shattered everything. He lost his master, his friends, and pretty much any sense of safety he'd ever known. And instead of some noble Jedi journey, he ended up doing what a lot of people would do. He ran. He spent years hiding who he was, burying the Jedi part of himself so deep that even he started forgetting it. He changed his name, dropped the robes, and just drifted through the galaxy, doing odd jobs, getting into bar fights, and pretending the Force didn't mean anything anymore. Not because he didn't care, but because it hurt too much. Being a Jedi used to mean something. Now, it was a death sentence. And for a long time, Kanan figured it wasn't worth the risk. But what makes Kanan stand out is what happened after all that. Because when he meets Hera and joins the Ghost Crew, you can tell something inside him starts shifting. He still plays it cool, sarcastic, distant, always kind of half-committed. But underneath that, you see a guy who wants to believe in something again. He just doesn't know how. And then comes Ezra. Now that throws a wrench into everything. Kanan never asked to be a teacher. He wasn't looking for a Padawan. But when this Force-sensitive kid shows up on Lothal, wild, reckless, but clearly gifted, Kanan knows he can't walk away. He remembers what it was like to be a scared, Force-sensitive kid in a world that didn't want him. And so, even though he feels totally unqualified, Kanan steps up. And that's the thing. Kanan is a mess of doubt. He's not like Obi-Wan, who trained Anakin with decades of temple discipline behind him. Kanan's just trying to remember how he was trained, while also unlearning half the stuff he was told to believe. He's making it up as he goes, and you see it. The moments where he second-guesses himself, where he loses patience with Ezra, where he worries he's pushing too hard or not hard enough. But that's what makes him such a good teacher. He's honest. He knows he's flawed. And instead of hiding that from Ezra, he lets him see it. He teaches through experience, not perfection. He learns alongside his student, and slowly, you see both of them grow. Kanan starts reconnecting with the Force in ways he hadn't since the Clone Wars. He starts believing again, not just in the Jedi, but in himself. And as the Ghost Crew gets deeper into the fight against the Empire, Kanan starts stepping back into that Jedi mindset. Not the rigid, rule-obsessed version from the Old Order, but something more personal. He's not following a council anymore, he's following his conscience. And honestly, that might be more Jedi than what the Order ever managed. One of the best parts of Kanan's journey is how he never pretends to have it all figured out. Even as a teacher, even as a leader, he's constantly growing. He starts off clinging to the old ways, lightsaber forms, meditation routines, Jedi mantras. But as time goes on, you see him soften. He starts listening more. He lets the Force guide him, even when it takes him somewhere unexpected. He learns to trust again. And somewhere in all that, he finds real purpose. It's not just about training Ezra anymore. It's about protecting his crew. It's about resisting the Empire, keeping hope alive. And you can feel that shift in him. He goes from a guy who was barely surviving to someone who's living with intention again. He's not just reacting, he's making choices. Thoughtful ones. Jedi ones. He's still got moments where he's impulsive, or frustrated, or just tired of carrying the weight of everything. But he never gives up. And in a galaxy where so many people fell to the dark side or disappeared completely, that counts for a lot. He also becomes something kind of rare in Star Wars. A Jedi who doesn't cling to the past, but doesn't throw it away either. He respects the old teachings, but he's not afraid to rewrite the parts that clearly didn't work. He knows the Jedi weren't flawless. He lived through their downfall. And instead of pretending it didn't happen, he tries to do better, quietly, day by day. So let's get this out of the way first. Cal Kestis didn't ask for any of this. He didn't grow up dreaming of glory or chasing prophecy. He didn't want to become some great hero of the galaxy. All the guy wanted was to stay alive, keep his head down, and not get killed by stormtroopers for existing. And yet, the dude is ridiculously powerful. He got a few years as a Padawan, saw his master get murdered in front of him, and then spent the rest of his youth running and hiding. That's it. That's the Jedi resume. And yet, when we catch up with him in Fallen Order, he's still able to hold his own. What's wild is how much of his power is built on recovery. He starts the game almost cut off from the Force. He's rusty, disconnected, and scared of what he can do. He literally hides his lightsaber like it's a curse. But as the story goes on, you realize just how much strength he's reclaiming. It's like watching someone piece together their identity, one memory at a time, and with every piece, his connection to the Force gets stronger. And it's not just, oh, he remembers how to wall run again. No, he reconnects with some seriously advanced stuff. Force pull, force push, slow time reflexes, double jumps, enhanced perception, lightsaber precision, and he does it under pressure, usually while being hunted by Inquisitors or giant alien beasts. Speaking of combat, Cal isn't just a Force user, he's a straight-up fighter. He uses multiple lightsaber forms, depending on the situation. You've got the classic single-blade stance, which is balanced and controlled. Then there's the double-bladed saber, which is great for crowd control and parrying blaster bolts. And then, when things get intense, he can split the saber into dual blades for fast, aggressive attacks. That's not some party trick. That's a level of versatility most Jedi don't even touch. He adapts on the fly, depending on what he's facing. Purge troopers, Night Sisters, bounty hunters, whatever. Oh, and let's not forget, Cal builds his own lightsaber. Twice. That might sound minor, but it's not. Building a lightsaber isn't just about putting parts together like a Lego set. It's a whole Force-guided process. And the fact that he does it, especially after everything he's been through, shows that he's reclaiming his identity as a Jedi, not just surviving as a fugitive. And then there's his Force Echo ability. That one's unique. Cal can touch objects and feel their memories, voices, emotions, even entire moments frozen in time. That's not some generic Force power you see everyone use. It's like Jedi empathy cranked up to 11. And it makes him not just a fighter, but a witness. He feels the pain of the Clone Wars. He hears the last words of fallen warriors. That kind of connection gives him a deeper understanding of what's at stake, and it keeps him grounded. As for raw strength, Cal's not Yoda, he's not tossing Star Destroyers, but let's be clear, he fights and beats Vader's Inquisitors. And that's not a small thing. The Second Sister, the Ninth Sister, and the other dark side users he goes up against are trained killers. They're not playing around, and yet Cal, often alone, sometimes injured, almost always outmatched, finds a way to survive, not because he's stronger, but because he's more determined. He adapts, he learns, and he fights smart. And yeah, he fights Darth Vader. Does he beat him? Of course not. But the fact that he holds his own for even a few seconds before barely escaping is insane. Most Jedi didn't even get that far. And instead of breaking down afterward, Cal takes it as motivation. He doesn't let fear stop him, he just keeps growing. By the time we see him in Jedi Survivor, Cal's power level has jumped significantly. He's more confident, more skilled, and honestly, kind of scary. He's taking out entire squads by himself. He's controlling the battlefield. He can lift and throw enemies like it's nothing, parry multiple foes at once, and juggle combos between lightsaber forms without breaking a sweat. That's not just Padawan on the run anymore. That's someone who's become a Jedi Knight, maybe even edging into master-level territory. But here's what makes Cal Kestis really special. He chooses the hard path. He could run. He could disappear. He could stay hidden like so many others. But instead, he puts himself in danger over and over again to help others. He protects Force-sensitive kids. He defends people under Imperial rule. He rebuilds connections when all he's ever known is loss. So, after all that, here we are, at the end of a long, slightly chaotic, surprisingly emotional journey through the galaxy's most famous space monks, or space samurai, or warrior therapists, or whatever the Jedi actually are. I don't think they even knew half the time. But whether they were leading armies, meditating in temples, slicing through droids, or just trying to keep their Padawan from doing something ridiculous, the Jedi left a mark, not just on the galaxy, but on us too. Even if you've only seen the movies once, there's always that one Jedi that sticks with you. Now, obviously, this list, it's not all of them. If we ranked every Jedi who's ever shown up in canon, legends, books, comics, side games, cutscenes, deleted scenes, and that one guy in the background of the council who got a name and then never appeared again, we'd be here for 4 hours minimum, and I'd still forget someone and get called out for it. This was more about the ones who stood out, the ones who shaped the Jedi legacy, pushed the Order forward or sideways. and made us feel something. Whether it was admiration, frustration, confusion, or just the urge to shout, "He deserved better," at the screen. These Jedi made the story what it is. Some were shining examples of the Order's ideals, others were cautionary tales, and a few were just doing their best with what little they had. What's kind of amazing, it's how different they all are. We talk about the Jedi like they're one uniform group, but once you actually dig in, they're all over the place. Some Jedi are calm and wise, some are snarky and impulsive. Some follow the rules to the letter. Others chuck the rulebook out the window and trust their gut. Some stayed with the Order till the end. Others walked away, got kicked out, or just quietly stopped following along. There's no one way to be a Jedi, and maybe that's the point. Because the Jedi were never supposed to be perfect. They were supposed to try to bring peace, try to listen to the Force, try to help people without letting ego or fear get in the way. And sometimes they failed, miserably. Sometimes they got caught up in politics. Sometimes they were so worried about doing things the right way that they forgot to do the right thing. But the ones who stood out, the ones we remember, are the ones who kept trying anyway. And yeah, the Order fell. The Temple got wiped out, most of them didn't make it. But the idea of the Jedi, that didn't die, it evolved. Slowly, quietly, through people like Luke, like Rey, like Ahsoka, like Kanan. People who weren't raised in the old ways, but still felt what it meant to be a Jedi. They rebuilt it not by copying what came before, but by learning from it, taking the good, ditching the bad, and figuring out how to carry the light forward without being blinded by tradition. So when you look at this ranking, whether you agree, disagree, just remember, these Jedi were never meant to be superheroes. They were flawed, human, complicated, and that's what makes them interesting. So let's keep it going. Who do you think got underrated? Who deserves a spot in the top 5? Which Jedi made you pause and go, okay, wait, they actually had a point? Drop it in the comments, start a debate. Just don't throw your lightsaber. Those things are expensive.